What's up guys, and welcome back to the channel. I've got a fun one for you today. We are bench building wainscoting, and this in particular is a beaded wainscoting. So this is the back side that you see here, but I'm going to show you some tricks that'll help you make big money doing stuff like this by using production techniques, but you'll also be able to execute at a really high level and get great results. So let's dig into it. Let me show you what we got going on. The room that we are going to be working in is right over here. This is, I believe, a study. So not a real big room, but got some walls going around and a couple different things we'll have to work around, but I've already got the layout done. So we're just gonna roll right into putting this all together. I've got some tips for you that will help you a lot whenever it comes to accuracy and also speed by simply using stop blocks for assembling the 1x material, as well as using the stop block for your beaded material. Right now we'll go ahead and take this first unit off the bench, take it into the room to install it. Just gonna rock it on down. I've got it pointed in the right direction. We should be able to go straight in. And because all of these stiles won't be landing directly on a stud, I went ahead and PL Premium the back side of this thing in advance before I move it into the room. That way it's ready just to be pushed right into place. Love it when a plan comes together. We're dodging outlets, getting the spacing we want. And all of these miters are absolutely perfect. So I am using a drywall backer on this. That's kind of just what was spec'd. Certainly would have been nice to have a solid backer, but this will work just fine. When we had the trim walkthrough, I considered suggesting using plywood as a backer, but with the way everything is price-wise now, we can do it with the drywall backer and get by just fine. All right guys, time to tackle this next section behind me. I'm kind of going around strategically, doing the full sections first that are easy to put in. I like doing this section because I can butt it right tight up against this casing. But then if I have a little space on this backside, that's no big deal because it'll be covered up by the next piece. Back at the workbench, before I get going further into this, I really want to emphasize to you guys who are starting out in the finished carpentry trade, the battle is won before you even start working a lot of times. On projects like these, how long it takes is not a matter of how hard you work. It's a matter of your strategy, how you go about completing the job. For example, on something like this, I could have went about this assembling it piece by piece on the wall with biscuits and pinch dogs, but that would have been a terrible idea in this situation. It would have taken longer walking back and forth. I wouldn't have got as good of a finish on the front because with pocket screws, all of the fastening is done on the back side. There's no holes from pinch dogs, and I can assemble it right away and clamp it. It also gets everything together really tight. Basically, just going about it the way that I am, it's a good overall strategy that's going to give me the best results. I can assemble it right here by my saw on a work table, and I can also assemble all of this bead molding inside on the workbench and get really good results. So always remember that. Take the time to get a good strategy before you start the project. Now we have our basic 1x frame all assembled. You can see everything is sanded. I sand everything with the ETS 150 5mm stroke, 120 grit sandpaper works wonderfully for poplar. So all these joints are fantastic. Also, at this point, we're about to start putting the beaded trim on, and this is the last chance that you'll have to soften this edge. So I went around also and softened this inside edge so that that's going to paint up really nice and we don't have any splinters hanging off of there. I mentioned before about using a stop block, and I've already got all of my stiles, the vertical pieces. These are all cut to length, and these were all cut to length with this stop block, and I did those all at the same time on purpose to ensure that they are all the exact same length, and you'll see why that is so important in a second. Now I'm about to show you some finished carpentry black magic. This will make you way more productive and make you a bunch of money. You might think, okay, yeah, Spencer, you cut all those stiles to the exact same length. That way you could batch cut all of your pieces of beaded trim. So now we need to move the stop block in order to get our length for this beaded trim since we're going to be mitering it. No. What you may not know this, but there is a pivot point on miter saws. And that pivot point runs along the backside of this fence. So I can cut this to length square using my stop block, but I can also cut this to length at a 45 and it'll be the exact same length because of this pivot point all the way in the back here along the plane of these fences. So what I'm gonna do here, watch this, we'll cut 145 on this side. Now we'll turn the saw over to 45 again, and I'll carefully bump that up against my stop block, cut a 45 here. Now watch this. This is the exact piece of trim that we just cut, and look what happens. Perfect length. It matches the exact length of our stiles precisely. Didn't have to move a stop block or anything. So by leaving that stop block exactly where it was, I'm able to cut all these stiles the same, batch cut them really fast, no pulling out a tape measure and marking anything. And I'm gonna have dozens of these pieces of beaded trim, exact same thing, never have to move the stop block, just cut away, and they're absolutely the perfect length. So that's the way to do it. That's how you make money in finished carpentry. You gotta work smarter, not harder. So I need 7 more pieces of this beaded trim. Ready, set, go. All right, there we go, 2 minutes and 40 seconds to cut 7 pieces. That's pretty quick to be knocking out very precise pieces of molding that are gonna fit perfectly. They aren't gonna need tweaked, recut, shaved off, be too short, none of that stuff. Perfect the first time. Now we've got our 8 pieces of trim cut for the vertical pieces of the box, but now what about these shorter sections? Am I gonna have to measure each one of those individually? No, we use the same thought process, strategically planning ahead as you do this, thinking down the road, how can I do this faster? So what I did was I used a gauge block as I put each of these stiles in place. In other words, start from the end, and then whenever you're going to attach this one, you use this block and then attach it. Move down to the next one, you use this block again, attach it. So I know I have these the exact same distance apart, except for the box on the very end, because you're gonna have some margin for error there. But the rest of all these are gonna be exactly the same because they have this spacing. So now I'm gonna show you the real black magic to be able to cut these to the exact length without ever taking out a tape measure and without moving your stop block. We're going to use the same principles that I was talking about before. Remember the pivot point that is right here at the center of your miter saw along the back of this fence. Doesn't matter whether you're cutting it square or at a 45-degree angle, that pivot point is the exact same. So what I can actually do here, I'm going to take the gauge block that I used to space my stiles apart. I'm going to set it right here, and I'm going to bump it up against my stop block. Remember, I don't want to move that stop block because I want to keep using it for all these other wall sections. I don't want to touch that thing. So I'm going to put my gauge block that I just used here, which is 25 and 11/16. Now I'm going to take a scrap board, and what I'm going to do is actually create another stop block to offset this one. So my scrap board here, I'm going to carefully bump that up against my gauge block. Okay, we've cut that off square. Now we're going to switch this around, and I'm going to take this off cut now, push that up against my stop block carefully. Now watch what happens. Let's cut another piece of bead molding. See if it fits. Keep in mind, these three sections are all exactly the same. I used the gauge block on these. Put that in here, perfectly snug. Rock it in here, perfectly snug again. No measuring, didn't get out my tape measure one time, and now I can batch cut all of these pieces just by using this stop block system and thinking ahead. It really increases your productivity. There we go, all done. All 6 pieces cut to length perfectly. Never had to use a tape measure or pencil. All we had to use was our gauge block that we used whenever we assembled the frame for our spacing. It's all it takes. Now we'll flip our face frame over so that the back side is facing up. That's how we're going to want to do this to install the beaded trim. I'm also going to grab a couple pieces of 2x material here to prop up the face frame. That makes it easier for me to be able to get my fingers underneath the molding and adjust it as I'm installing it. When installing trim like this, we want to install the smaller pieces first. You'll see why in a second. That way we can flex the larger pieces in, but I'm just making this bead mold flush to maybe slightly proud of the face frame. And again, what you're looking at here, this is the back side of the material. Just using an 1.5-inch brad nail to nail this on. Notice that perfect length. It just doesn't get any better. It's just so easy. Now to install these longer pieces, I look at the end and I carefully try and push that in so that it is flush. And then with it being a longer piece, you can flex it to get it in position. And it's gonna be the perfect length, but that's still tight. You gotta work with it a little bit and kind of talk to it a little, but see that snapped in just right where we want it. It's going to be a bunch of crispy miters. Down here all the way on the end, we were able to batch cut the vertical pieces because obviously they're going to be the exact same length as the stiles. However, since we used our gauge block going down the way, whenever you get to that last box, it's pretty much going to be impossible to have that exact same spacing. So for these two shorter pieces on the last box, those are the only two pieces that I'll need to manually measure and cut. All buttered up on the back with PL Premium. So we'll carry it in the room now, pop it in place and nail it off. You will notice that there was a switch there beside that casing. I went ahead and chiseled out that box so the wire's loose in there, and then we'll put a remodel box in later. Now let me ask you this. How do these miters look to you? Pretty stinking good. Every single one of them, I guess, besides the piece that had a knot in it that I didn't catch. Oh well, guess I can't get everything right. But you can see that's pretty incredible for not pulling out a tape measure. Pretty good cuts. All right, guys, at this point, we've got all the easy stuff done now, and we're on to our most difficult wall here, this wall that's got this window on it. Definitely a little bit tricky. Trying to think of the best layout options, it's worth it to take your time. In this case, I decided to line up my pieces here with the moles on this window. If I would have evenly spaced it out, they would have been offset by 1 inch or 2, which these being offset from those just looked weird to me. So I decided to center those and then kind of fudge things a little bit over here to make it appear to be equal spacing, even though it's not. Also, the window was about 1 inch off center in this wall. So we're just kind of adjusting and tweaking to make things look the best that we can. So I am going to build this whole thing on the workbench, but I wanted to show you how I'm laying it out. It's better to lay it out and get accurate measurements and make sure you're good to go. yeah, you kind of get the picture. So I've got all my pieces laid out here. Another thing that I did was I went through and I lettered all these with a letter. So here we've got K, K, because I've got similar sized pieces, but these are not all cut exactly the same. So I want to ensure that whenever I'm assembling this on the table, that I'm putting the correct joints and connections together the whole way around. And you see these small pieces down here. We've got piece E, 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 F, 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 so on and so forth. So now's the fun part. We'll try to put this thing together with pocket screws and we'll bring it back in and install it. Alrighty guys, we've got this all bench built, came together nicely. Going around the window, opted just for miter with some pocket hole screws. Those went together really well. But you can see here just why labeling stuff is so important to ensure that you're getting the right pieces in the right locations. Also realize that because you're pocket hole screwing, you're flipping boards over to do your pocket holes and then pre-assembling it upside down and stuff like that. So you've got to communicate really well with yourself as you're doing this, because obviously you put a lot of work into pre-assembling a piece like this and you don't want to accidentally put it together wrong. You know, these are different lengths, just the way it is. You don't want to be flipping these around and stuff. You want to get everything nice and crispy where it's supposed to be. I do want to mention doing the pocket hole screws for this thing. I'm just using the Craig system. I know a lot of you guys use Castle and love it. I'm heavily into the Craig system, so that's what I've got. I brought my Craig Foreman to do this. I love the Craig Foreman. It's super light. It's really easy just to grab and go. I think it's an incredible value at about 350 to 400 bucks. So this is the first one I ever have owned. I've had it for a long time. And with this initial model, whenever you drop the arm down, there's actually a wire on the inside that would rub and it would get loose to where the machine wouldn't work. And I called into Craig. A buddy of mine told me to do this. Called Craig, told him what was going on, gave him the model number of the machine. They sent me a brand new Craig Foreman, no questions asked, because they knew that it was an issue. Well, silly me, I actually sold the brand new one thinking, well, shoot, I can repair the wiring on this. It's been sitting up in my attic and I brought it along today realizing that I hadn't repaired the wiring yet. So this doesn't work. Instead, I used one of my favorite tools, and that's this little Craig jig. You just put it on a clamp, and honestly guys, it's super fast. I use it all the time. All you gotta do is just clamp it on the end of your board, get your drill out, and you can do pocket hole screws really fast. So that's how I've done this whole room. It hasn't taken long at all. You can really crank through them, no big deal. So that's how I'm doing the pocket hole screws. Just wanted to cover that quick. At this point, we've got it upside down because we just pre-assembled it. I'm gonna go ahead and flip it over, sand the face side, and then we'll flip it back over and put in our beaded trim. Face is all sanded up now, looking really nice. And then on these leading edges on the face, like to just take a little sandpaper and soften those guys up. Make sure we don't have any splintering or dents or anything like that in the corners, because once the beaded trim is in here, we won't have access to that to sand it. So we got to do that now. Now we'll go ahead and flip this over. When you go to install your bead molding on a setup like this, it really shows you how much time is gained by using the stop block system. Whenever you can't use a stop block, you're left measuring each of these individual pieces, because again, basically there was nothing consistent on this entire piece. So basically every piece besides the two end pieces had to be measured and cut individually. Takes quite a bit longer. Still, everything came together really well. So it's time to flip this baby over, put some adhesive on the back, and cross our fingers and hope that it fits the way it is supposed to. I did decide to bevel the ends just to make it slide into place easier and to kind of help ensure that I get a nice tight fit up against my other stiles that are already in there. Even though this is paint grade, it's just pretty satisfying to do a stain grade install nonetheless. So did the bevel on both sides, but you can see on the front here, everything is looking great. So can't wait to see this get slid into place and nailed off. All right guys, got some bad lighting going on in here, but hopefully you can still see this well. I got this wall done. It slipped right into place perfectly, fit like a glove. I wanted to point out, layout is something you want to take your time with and really think through on how you can make it look as best as possible. Now, if I would have made all of my boxes on this wall the same spacing width-wise, then it would have thrown off. These two stiles right here would have been offset from the window moles a couple inches. I ended up deciding to center these two stiles with the window moles, which looks much better to me. Looks like it was designed to be that way. So then remember, finished carpentry is about tricking the eye to make things look like they're supposed to be a certain way. So then the boxes on the sides here are actually 2 inches narrower than this box right here, but it still looks great. The eye cannot really detect that whenever you're looking at it straight on. So I'm super happy with how everything came together. Had very similar spacing on all of my boxes the whole way around the room. Turned out really good. To finish everything off, we've got a nice cap detail here. It's got a 3/4 inch rabbet on the underside, so this will just sit down right on top of your horizontal rail, and that works really well. With a profiled window and door casing, it was a little tricky to come up with a nice termination on the end, but basically what I had to do was cut a mitered return on the end rather than having it square, and then I had to notch out for the casing and that looks pretty good. So the painter will be able to caulk that and paint it, and I think it'll look nice all finished up. Overall, I'm super happy with how everything came together. I absolutely love that beaded molding that goes on the inside of these panels. It's gonna look really sharp once it's all painted up. Pocket hole joinery was a great thing to use on this. Again, the strategy that you pick in the beginning of a process like this, you go with the right strategy, you're gonna save a ton of time and get a better quality result. In this case, pocket hole joinery was far superior than trying to use pinch dogs and biscuits and assemble in place on the wall. I was able to pre-assemble on the table with pocket hole joinery, sand everything immediately, and then flip it over and install all of my bead molding as well on the bench. So you can't beat that. Combine it with the stop block and we were moving and making money. So I'm really happy with how everything came together. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hopefully you learned some things. And I will try to do an update video at the end of this job to show you what this room looks like all painted up. So thanks for watching. We'll see you again next time.